Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Friday Focus on this, the 23rd of August, in the middle of the summer break for those in the UK. Really pleased that you've joined us, and thank you for those that have subscribed. If you see from the screen, you can. I'm just going to take a moment at this point to really get into our channels. So we are now broadcasting on YouTube under the Smart Curriculum Network as a growing channel. We put our stuff there so that you can see it, and there's some growing shorts that you'd be able to take in about the work of Smart Curriculum and what we're doing in many schools. And obviously you will be connected if you're looking on LinkedIn, and we're growing our base there. But thank you for those that are following. I realise this is the holiday, so probably many people will pick up on this in the recording. But thanks for joining, and thanks for supporting Friday Focus and the idea of taking some time on a Friday morning just to think about bigger subjects within the education world. So let's get into today. You'll know that in the Friday Focus, the series that I've been doing called Making Positive Changes has been focusing on with colleagues on making differences, doing things that will make a change to our children. I'll use the term that some people refer to the education system being broken. I don't think it's broken. I think it's come to an inflection point that people recognise that there's a real need for change. And that whole idea of being able to make positive change is where we want to be. I've never been a person when I was serving in schools, or since as I've been serving schools, in post or in the company that I created, I've never been one for looking negatively at things. I mean, obviously there are mistakes that are made, there are things that are going in the wrong direction, and there are improvements that are needed. But we always look to find the positive, and it's really important that we hold that mindset. One of the things I found really powerful in moving forward, so I was saying about the positive change focus of this podcast, is that there are people out there that are doing some really great stuff. There's some really positive things being achieved by people, and it's about highlighting those and but getting into and understanding what it is that people are doing and what they're saying and how they're acting, and what impact that's having on learners. And there's some really interesting people coming up between now and Christmas. We've got some colleagues that are coming to talk to us about other books that they've published. They're writing their journey and their story, and they're putting out there, or people that are actually practically doing it. So I think of those that have spoken already. So Andrew Fell and the School Improvement Journey, Emma Tibbetts and Mark Orrow Whiting and their Foundations First, looking at learning from the ground up, and then Matt Pittman earlier in just before the break from Australia, and his work on his book, The Connection Curriculum, and how he's connecting with the community and how important that is to that journey. Now we're going to keep going on that journey with positive changes, and we're going to look for what are the things that people are saying and doing that make positive impact. So look out for those, though. That series of focus podcasts on what people are doing are coming, and we'll be talking more about those as we move through. The podcast is likely to move to once a fortnight rather than once a month. So just to keep you informed, look out for it on LinkedIn, look out for it on YouTube, and thank you for those that are liking and sharing. Please do. If you're watching on YouTube, like and share, and subscribe. And if you're on LinkedIn, please do share the podcast with your network, because it makes a difference to us. There's no money exchange here. This is a free service, but it's interesting to be talking about these things and get people involved in the conversation. So why today? as a 40-year veteran, 39 years of teaching and working in education, the summer break, the 6 weeks, whether it stays that or not is another matter, but the 6 weeks have been that place where people take time to reflect and refresh and restore themselves. One of the things that I've tried to do over the year, and I was never a great reader. I prefer to listen and hear, but it's that so I listen to a lot of stuff, which you'll see it towards the end of this podcast. There's quite a bit of stuff that I am listening to, and I was listening to stuff just 2 minutes up to the start of the podcast. But the summer read, there are lots of people that put out the great Bill Gates list of the 10 books for the summer, and he goes away with his tote bag and he sits in a cabin and reads and just soaks up what other people are doing. Now that's a really important discipline of taking time to reflect, taking time to refresh, taking time to input new thoughts and new ideas. So I thought, as I was talking with my team, this in the middle of the summer would be great just to say, well, what have I been reading? What do I think are books that I should be reading? And then get a feel for that great summer read. So I started with the idea that I would begin with the 10 books, do the kind of Bill Gates, Al Kingsley has done the same within the EdTech business, and there are lots of others. And I get these lists of 10 books. And I think, okay, so here would be Chris's 10 books. Well, I started doing that, and I ended up with a lot more. And I was trying to choose what books how would I get to my 10. I found it really difficult with all that's going on in the education world. So what you're going to get is, in the next few minutes, is just a set of books. In a sense, there's a bit of, they're the favourites. They're my favourites at the moment. But they are my significant books, and why I think we should, as a profession, be looking wider and looking at what's going on. Some of them I've completed reading. Some of them are on my list to read. We're still in the middle of the summer, so I've got a couple of weeks left, and I'm still trying to get through some of them. But I think they're important books for us to look at. Some have been recommended to me, and some I'm gonna champion. Now, so let's get into the list, because otherwise I won't get through to the end. The first book, I've worked with a whole load of schools within Smart Curriculum on curriculum design, shaping schools, and I've developed this concept that I talk to a lot of schools about, which is population design. The whole idea that the way that we group children makes a difference to learning. It puts a ceiling, in some cases, on where children can move. And within the theory, I talk about the equity of provision. Is it doing what it needs to do at the source, or is it shortchanging children? Is it viable? Is it economically viable? So is it efficient? And is there the opportunity for movement? Can children move? So the mobility of learners, the equity of provision, and the efficiency of its shape. Now that if you want to get further into it, those talk to me, message me about this whole idea of population design. Now we do it at a strategic level, and we do it at a granular level in classes and groups. So in a primary classroom with tables of 6, that's population design. You're grouping a population of learners. Why are they shaped? Do you have the bright table and the weak table? Do you have a mix of learners around a table? Now, again, you can get into the rights and wrongs of all of that, but that's population design. But we do it at the highest level. We do it at the level where we say, we're going to take a population, a school of learners from a local community, and put them in a grammar school, and we are going to put the other learners in a comprehensive school. Now that's population design at a strategic level. We do it by year groups. We do it. We group children by age. Their date stamp, as Ken Robinson used to say. We do it by gender. We do it by gender at a school level, and we do it by gender at an in-school level. So gender grouping for sports. So anyway, what we have this idea of population design. Now, in my list of books, I'm going to champion the first book, if I can get the slide to do what it's supposed to do. Just excuse me 1 second. I just need to shape things. Let's take that off a second. Let's do this again. The first technical difficulties we've had, what we should have. There we go. We've got our book. Let's see if I can get the thing to work. Excuse me 1 second. That's the first time we've had technical difficulties, but there we go. There we go. There's my book. Right, Reassessing Ability Groupings by Becky Francis, Becky Taylor, Antonia Tereszchenko. Now, Becky Francis now CEO of the EEF, but I'm going to champion this book because I think every school curriculum leader and every school subject manager, so heads of departments and so on, should read this book. Reassessing Ability Grouping actually is an evaluation of how we put population designs together, and it talks about the comparison between mixed ability and ability grouping, and the reality is it asks more questions than it answers. It starts to look at that whole subject of what are the impacts. You can see in the title, improving practice for equity and attainment. So that's the whole, so my population design theory actually is supported in a lot of what Becky Francis and the team have said. I would recommend that you get the book. It asks a lot of questions, but it leads you into asking the questions that you need to ask. It starts to talk about gap analysis and how it creates that. It will get into some of the language that we use. And if you know me and the way that I operate, I will challenge all of the structural questions around how we put schools together. But we get into all sorts of things around how are we creating gaps in attainment. But there's lots of detail in the book, but I strongly recommend if you are leading school and you're interested in school design and you're going to challenge, well, we've always done it this way, get into it, because it starts to ask questions that you will start to answer in your own thinking. There is no one answer. And you will have the particular subject specialisms that will say, well, we must, because of tiered exam papers, have setting, the obvious being maths. There will be others that will say, well, we must have gender setting. Well, this is focused on ability. You get into sport, we get into the questions of elitism and whether that's right, and what happens to those that are not in those that are picked for teams. It's a great read. It's a good one to get into. But if you're thinking about how your school's put together, this is a great book to get into. I need to move on, otherwise I'm not going to get through my pile of books. I couldn't do a session like this without referring to Ken Robinson. And Ken Robinson, the late Ken Robinson, and his daughter, Kate Robinson. Now, she finished this book for Ken at the point of him leaving us. Imagine If. Now, you know, he was a future thinker. He was an evaluator of what was going on is going on in schools, and obviously, all that he talks about is imagination and creativity. You know, he's given that. I've already referred to some things that he said, and his YouTube speaking and lots of things that he said and done are everybody knows and lots of people are talking about, because he was a very influential speaker. But he asks a lot of questions, as Becky Francis does in her book. It's not necessarily giving answers, it's asking some serious questions about where we're leading. It's very interesting, and you will see in my pick of books there's a thread of creativity. I can't help that, because that's how I am, and that's who I was trained to be as a design technology teacher way back in the 1980s. But that's the start of, I mean, what Ken Robinson says is that we begin, you know, a 3-year-old, hugely creative, trying new things, always doing new things, always looking for change. You've watched children with toys, and they'll do things with toys that you wouldn't thought, you know, it's not made for that. That's not what it's for. Well, yeah, that's what's going on in their head. It's how they are imagining what's going on. And Ken Robinson asks the question, what if in education we did not spend all of our time educating out that creativity? Now, at a time of political change and economic challenge, we need people that are problem solvers. We need people that are creative thinkers. We need people that are going to look to the future and create the future that we want. Now, whether that's in socioeconomic terms or whether that's in practical terms, we need people who are going to be doing that stuff. So imagine if we were able to educate learners so that they are not rote thinkers. I've often said, you know, that this stuff about AI and coming into education, AI is machine learning. It's that element. But if all we see ourselves and children as being are knowledge repositories, you know, read, retain, write, store knowledge in our brain, and then regurgitate that in a test. If that's all we are, then that's just a machine. What we need to be educating to is this. Imagine if we had a whole load of entrepreneurial, and I don't mean that just in business sense, I mean in the broadest sense, idea creating, idea producing people. What if we could do this? What if we could do that? And that's where the book kind of asks the question. It doesn't lay out how in any way. It asks a series of questions, and it's an entertaining read. And Kate Robinson has done a great job in finishing it. So I recommend it to you. If you're interested, again, if you come from a creative or non-creative background, doesn't matter, get into it. But again, we are going to need some following actions. And I hope where we are with the government position at the moment, because they're beginning to look at creativity. I was reading some Ross McGill stuff, the teacher toolkit, saying, you know, well, critical thinking is back on the table where that was taken out. So that's what we need to be developing. And if you haven't done so already, get into our newsletter. The last one I put out last week, or this week, number 5, is asking that question: curriculum, what next? And there's a whole lot of stuff in there on what's going on around the UK, and particularly featuring the Welsh curriculum review and what's happened with that. Now, again, it's very focused on emotional mental health, securing those within our young people, but it also talks about creativity as one of their 4 dimensions and strands. So get into that newsletter if you haven't done so already. Have a look at the newsletter, because it will give you lots of resources and lots of ideas of what you might be able to do. Okay, got to keep going. The sad departure of Tim Brighouse recently. I feature Mick Waters and Tim Brighouse wrote this book about our schools, improving on previous best. Now, look, that I like it because I mean, it's a tome. It's a if I've got it to hand, but I won't pick it up. It's one of those books that I respect it because they talked to a whole load of people. In fact, there are a number of names on the front of the book that I know. Some I've worked with as colleagues in schools, but it's a great group of people, and they consulted widely and talked about the kind of things that we want to see in our education system. And they have some conclusions at the end about where they see the education process going. Now, both guys respect greatly. I don't know them, but I've been around the influence that they've had, particularly at QCA. Professor Mick Waters, and the work that they're doing now as elder statesman. Obviously, Tim left us some months ago, but still a huge, impactful guy in the education. I remember seeing them at the education show talking about the book, and just with such grace and enthusiasm about the system, not taking a negative view, but really I mean, the subtext of the heading, improving on our previous best. They took a very positive view of what is in the system, and let's see what we can do better. It's this is we've just come through the results series, and I genuinely believe education is not about a series of mathematical numbers that produce a result. It's about the experience for each of the learners. And I talk with my colleagues in Smart Curriculum about the lived experience of children, the lived experience of staff. That's a lot of what we're about. But their goal was to see a way of capturing the education, so as they talk about the balanced scorecard rather than grading systems with Ofsted. And it seems that may well come, maybe their influence is in there, and it's actually been listened to. But we're in results season. It's not all about a series of numbers. It's about the experience and the doors that are opened because of the whole process. We're in conversation with some other nations that don't have that graded system, the gradings by subjects, that they have a single output result. You've been educated and you've done okay. And then how you choose to use that as you move forward is up to you. But so again, about our schools, improving on the previous best, Tim Brighouse and Mick Waters, I recommend it highly to you. Good read. Now, going to go back to this book, The School Organisation, was published in 1969. If you can get a copy, and it's still there, you can see it's still available on Amazon. Generally, it's a hardback copy, but I recommend, if you again are in school leadership, and if you haven't thought about the whole process of SRMA and ICFP. I know that they're previous government idea. This school efficiency, initiated by Lord Agnew. Well, actually, it wasn't initiated because this work, T.I. Davies was doing this work in Wales in the 1960s, and this book is the foundation of that whole thought. And to be honest, the Smart Curriculum Analytics is based on the ideas of T.I. Davies. And that was where I started 15 years ago doing the kind of work I'm doing now. And it was kind of one of those opportune moments where somebody mentioned it. I was already doing some work in the field, working with schools that were significantly in deficit. And I was looking for ways of moving things forward. This book, I would suggest, is, if you can get a hold of a copy, is a good baseline understanding. Now, the one thing, and I'll use that word advisedly, it's really interesting that he starts with, in a state education system, what is the baseline that you can expect? Now, all of us come to school with the view of what we experienced in the past, our experience of school, and that's how we respond. That I expect it to be what I had. And, we come back to that thought of, well, it's what I know, it's what I'm familiar of, it's what we've always done. Well, the truth is, and actually, if you read the Welsh curriculum review, it starts with the statement, the national curriculum was created in 1988, and the world is different in 2024, and we need to relook. And it is. I mean, it started 3 or 4 years, no, 4 or 5 years into my teaching career. I remember sitting in school and getting the national curriculum booklets, and for me it was the white and green booklet of design technology, and we got all of the others, so the yellow and the blue and the red, and I remember all the training sessions that we had when we delivered it. But the question that he asked is, what is the baseline that we expect? We could say of the examination result series, is it right that children fail, to use that word? And I've heard it in the news over the last couple of days, this idea that any child that's gone through a state education system, have they failed, or has it failed them? Now, that's an interesting question. Now, the questions that T.I. Davis asked in the book are about school organisation, how we put the thing together. And I would link those two together. Are we failing? And that's why I would tie that back to Becky France's book, Reassessing Ability Grouping is one of the issues. How we put children together in school, do we clump them into, well, you are that, and therefore you're in this group? And I'm going to use the term, the classic sync group, the classic bottom set, the classic note. So, all of that kind of organizational detail, that's, how can children be creative and live in that environment? If you want to get into school organization, it's one of those books that will make a difference to how you view. It's an old book now because it was written in 1969. The truths are still right. Some of the context has changed dramatically, but I recommend, if you can, get hold of a copy. I did, and I managed to find a signed copy by both the Right Honourable Lord James Rushmore and T.I. Davis. It was the book that Lord Rushmore sent to his to the author. So I'll hold that one with for prosperity. But there it is. There, that's the book. Now I want to move on a little bit because I'm moving on in time. So the next book in my series is you probably now picked up the theme. There is quite a lot going on in the education world that's asking questions around, are we creating creative thinkers? Are we educating creative thinkers? One of the books I've started reading, and just fascinating in terms of resources. This book, Teaching Creative Thinking, Developing Learners Who Think Critically and Can Solve Problems. Now, it applies across the curriculum. It is not just art being creative, or drama being creative, or design technology, or food. It's across the whole curriculum, thinking in ways and giving teachers the basis on which they can be creative in their classrooms. In one of my last roles, I led or line managed a maths team of 20 who were developing problem-solving maths across the whole department. And it was a secondary school, year 7 to year 13. And they were developing practical problem-solving activities within maths. And they used to take time within the curriculum to deliver problem solving. So can I recommend to you that as a great read? It's a good basis. And I happened to see Bill Lucas speak at the ASCL conference, I think it was last year, and I certainly was inspired by what he's saying. And I would suggest to you that the application of such a book is one that will really impact your teaching if you are a teacher and you want to get things moving. I'm going to pair that with a follow-up book, which is Creative Thinking in Schools, a Leadership Playbook. Now, it really is the kind of the follow-on and the partner book to this last one, and it's focused on how do we get leaders to create the opportunities to be creative within school. What opportunities can we make, and what can we do? And there's some great ideas in it. It talks about how we can create the habits in the classroom, and what language and narrative we can use across the school, and what shared experiences that we can start building across the school. So I would thoroughly recommend you get both of the books if you want to get into creative thinking. Again, really interesting to see that the Secretary of State, the new Secretary of State, is thinking about this and how do we get creativity into schools. It's coming. It's something that's being talked about. Yes, it's a legacy from other people, maybe even Ken Robinson and his legacy for schools. We are starting to think about it. So the work of Bill Lucas is marked. It's valuable. It's really important. So I would recommend as a read, as a summer read, if you're a leader in schools, get hold of it. There's some very practical ideas. There's some very practical stuff in it, but you can see this theme about problem solving, encouraging creativity in schools. Really great resources to build from. Just going to pause for a second on that one. Someone on LinkedIn asking the question: education has always been treating kids as knowledge repositories. Yes, a good broad balanced knowledge base is useful, but it has to be applicable, and to be applicable it has to cater for the individual student's interests, creativity, motivation and energy. Couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the things schools would do well to do is to get into something like what the book that I've just shown you. Use the books as a resource to try and encourage all of your staff to be in that creative mode, because we need people that are going to be thinking geographically, historically, from a physical education point of view. You know, every area of the school curriculum, we are going to need people to be thinking creatively, problem solving. It's a mindset approach. I was tutored in it when I was doing my degree. You know, it's back to problem solving, design theory. We start with what is the problem. We come up with analyzing the problem, so what needs to be done. We come up with ideas, of which there are many solutions. We realize it, and then we test it. Now that design theory idea is a problem solving approach. It's a methodology, but it applied in every situation. I mean, that's how I've lived my life. That's how, I consider every issue. You go through, and the truth is there are many solutions. The mental acuity of young people to be able to see a number of solutions and then analyze and choose one doesn't mean they pick the right one. Great if they do. If it doesn't, then go and have a look at another one. So that's what design theory is all about. But great question. I agree with you entirely. I must move on. Let's get into the next book. Now, you'll know recently I've been working with Mark and Emma from Foundations First. And last time I was speaking to them, we did a session on curriculum and curriculum change. They referred to a number of books, one of which was this one, The Science of Learning. I've not started reading it yet, but I put it in here because they were so enthusiastic about it, and it's supporting teachers in the quest to help students learn effectively and efficiently as possible. The Science of Learning translate 99 of the most important and influential studies in the topic of learning into accessible and easily digestible overviews. Now, again, I've seen the detail within the book, and they really are. It's take 99 studies and make that applicable in your classroom. I am all for making sure we we've got that ability to get into this whole idea of supporting teachers to apply research-based knowledge into the classroom. It'd be really good. I'm going to pause again. Andrew, just put your comment on the screen. Just rereading Vista and reclaiming teaching. Proactive and challenges the move to teachers facilitating learning away from teaching. Worth a dip in to this debate. So yeah, we talk about these books quite often. So yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's a good shout. Look, again, we are educators. We're into reading. We're into collecting resources. Whether you're an enthusiastic reader or not, what are these books? What of these books make a difference? What I liked about this one is that you could simply pick it up, find something that you're looking for in your classroom, read one section, and then go and do something about it. Now, I'm going to just pause and just think about a methodology here. In some of the school improvement journeys that Andrew and I have worked on with schools, one of the most effective culture change tools that I've seen work is to take a book, get it a copy for all members of staff that want to read, and then create effectively a book club. One school that I've been working with this year did it, and they had the Friday morning tea and bacon session. So they actually invested for all members of staff to have a cup of tea and a bacon sarnie in the staff room on a Friday morning at quarter to 8. But the task that they had to do was to take a book like this one, and for this week, we are going to concentrate on this strategy. Read it, have a go, and then come and talk about the book, the study, and what you have done with it. And I've seen other books that I'm going to refer to in a minute that are in there used to great effect. I've seen people and schools do that with a work of fiction. So take a novel that's got high values or a particular theme within it, and just get the staff thinking about that subject. My thought in that is that it's like that active change agent, where if you want to drop some seeds of change, you can do it through using a book and actually get people to work through those elements. And you can see change ripple through the school. You're thought leading, you're placing activity in people's minds, and it comes to mind as you move through the school. If there's lots of people that will say, systems are important, so we're going to have a new behavior system, or we're going to have a new this, and we're going to have a new that. Using this book method of getting people to read, you'll find who are your champions very quickly. You'll find the people that will lead on those activities who are open-minded and growth-minded. You'll find them very quickly, and then you will see that change ripple through the school. I guarantee it. You'll need to start with people that are open to it, and you can use a book like this one as that start point. Just get people thinking. And again, if it's about values of education, again, Andrew's just dropped a link to the book and a summary and the reflections on it. This is the kind of stuff that you want to get people thinking about. Just read something, just get them active in a conversation. What works, what doesn't work, what I try, why didn't it work for me? It's actually giving agency back to teachers rather than the sort of punitive, I'm going to observe you and have you done this and all the rest of that. There's a place for that. But what is important in this kind of round is that you're engaging teachers' minds and ensuring that the professionalism of the staff is engaged in that process. That will change the culture of the school. And using books to do that, I have found really impactful. Now, I'm getting nowhere near the end of my book list, so I'm going to zip through just because there's a few things that I wanted to get to before the end, and we are going to finish at 8:30 today. So my next book, Making Thinking Visible, by Ron Ritchart, Mark Church, and Karen Morrison. This is on my list to get to. I haven't read it yet. I will review it later again, but again, it was one of the books that Emma and Mark referred to. Really interesting, this whole idea of creativity and moving things forward. Visible thinking, I think, is a key aspect. Again, it's there. I recommend it highly, and I'm going to zip through. So excuse me for moving for a second. Again, coming back to this creativity, lifelong kindergarten, cultivating creativity through projects, passion, peers, and play. You know, this whole idea. In fact, when the conversation with the two of them last time was really saying, look, what's going on, the free flow that's going on in kindergarten, and that whole idea of allowing children the space to grow, that's the thing that Ken Robinson was talking to. And very interestingly, Mitchell Risnick, the forward is by Ken Robinson in this book, and that whole encouraging that process to go. So again, lifelong kindergarten, that whole idea of what some of the things that are going on in kindergarten and in nursery and in reception, and how that flows through school is a really interesting question. And it's interesting to see how that is reflected in some of the international systems. Again, on my list to read, I thoroughly recommend it to you. Certainly what I've flicked so far is a good start point. We talked about this last time. It's on my list for the summer. How Children Succeed. Of course, it's about, I mean, the whole question in this one, grit, curiosity, and the hidden power of character. That was the essence of what we talked about with Emma and Mark. Character education is coming back onto the table. The attribute development, and certainly some of the things that excuse me, Paul Tough talks about in the book is really impactful. I mean, I went through character education maybe 8 years ago with a multi-academy trust, and developing attributes and how we track attributes, not saying yes, you know, you've achieved something particular, but that whole idea of there are some important attributes that you need to grow, and how we as teachers take responsibility to encourage those. I thoroughly recommend the book. I'm moving quickly because I've spent a long time on the others. So the connection curriculum, we had Matt Pittman on the show, this whole idea of connecting school to its community, and how we need to make sure that there's a kind of interaction between those, and all the dimensions that he talks through. It's a really well considered, well researched book. I thoroughly recommend it. If you haven't got it so far, please do get in and read and have a look. I've mentioned already and previously the whole idea of unleashing greatness, and David Hopkins' book. Again, school improvement systems, systemized change, really important to have a look at. I've talked about it before, but again, it's in my pile down here of books to read. Now, the one thing I was going to say is, as educators, we go beyond education books, and I've featured 14 education books in my pile for today. I listen to a whole lot of other stuff, and I'm going to recommend to you Politics on the Edge by Rory Stewart. He talks about his journey from education into politics and out of politics. It's a really interesting journey. It's been reviewed as saying, you know, it's a classic before its time. The reason I got into it is because I was listening to his podcast, and I think as educators we should be reading widely, and we should be looking at other stuff. It's a fascinating book. It's a great read, and you learn some things about his journey into politics that are really important, and things that talk to our values and talk to the way we treat people. I think as educators, we need to sort of glean from others and be eclectic in that way. I'm thoroughly enjoying reading it. He's an interesting character, and I'll come to a little bit more because I've got something else to say about him as we move through. if you're a great Monty Python fan, you'll know the writing of Michael Palin. I have got into genealogy and tracing family history, and that, since I left full-time teaching, that's been a kind of hobby in the background. And I find that fascinating. I've always read autobiographies. I was inspired by reading a number over the years, and I've read a number of political and non-political autobiographies. But this one, Great Uncle Harry, great simple title, is a funny read. It's a great read. If you, but it speaks to this whole idea of war and empire, and the influence that UK has had across the world, or Britain has had across the world. The title in the book says Great Uncle Harry is an utterly compelling account of an ordinary man who led an extraordinary life. Wouldn't that be great for all of us to somebody say that about any of us, man or woman? But just it's a great read. I recommend it to you if you haven't seen it, and then follow that with his Michael Palin's Erebus. That's how I pronounce it. I'm sure others will pronounce it differently. The story of a ship, really simply. Again, how you followed Michael Palin and his journeys around the world. It's a fascinating read, and it just how this came to him was really, it's this inspiring book about how this happened, and parts of the UK, because actually the book it describes how the ship was built in Pembroke. And if you go to Pembroke and the harbour there now, you'd never believe that a ship had been built there. But there's, the economic change of our country and how that's grown is really, really interesting. I'm going to skip a couple of books at this point and just say some other things that I would recommend that we would get into. I couldn't do this without mentioning some podcasts. And I think there's a really interesting change, and if you're not listening to stuff and hearing what's going on, it's something to do. If you haven't got time to read all the time, you're marking or whatever. I work with a podcast on quite often, and I'm really interested at the moment in the fact that a lot of podcasts are getting into this, that what would perhaps be diametrically opposed people and sharing ideas across the table. So Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, again, that's obviously where the book came from, a Labour policy strategy lead, press expert with a Tory, a Conservative politician. Their conversations are really interesting. They're different, and the rest is politics, US, as a podcast on whatever podcast platform you might use. But just listening to that conversation of difference of ideas and how they come together. Caddy Kay and Anthony Scaramucci do their American version, and I'd listen to both. Or Political Currency, George Osborne and Ed Balls. Again, diametrically opposed in ideas and policy, but really interesting to hear what they're saying. So if you're struggling with time to read, listen to and some of the series behind these. There's lots of them, and I'm just going to put a few on the board. If you haven't started listening to TED, there's some brilliant TED education, TED lessons worth sharing. There's a great one, and I from June last year, How to Design a School for the Future by Punya Mishra. Really interesting, fascinating stuff. Get into it if you can. I'm also going to say there's on the history here, or the legacy. So Afra Hirsch and Peter Frankopan, the whole idea of people and the impact that they've had, and they question in their podcast: is the legacy of these people exactly what we think it is the story right? They're great resources that you could use with A-level students and start asking questions. So that whole idea of creative thinking and critical thinking, they model it in the podcast. So I would thoroughly recommend that idea. And they've done 11 so far. In fact, revisited Cecil Rhodes. They're just doing one now. Napoleon, Cecil Rhodes, Picasso, Gorbachev, Nina Simone, Alan Turing, Cleopatra, Margaret Thatcher, J. Edgar Hoover, Bob Marley, all names that we know in history, but really impactful and a resource that could be used in schools. Now, as ever, I'm a teacher that has prepared far more than I'm ever going to use. So I'm going to stop there. I've got some others that I was going to suggest. If you're into Audible, there's a whole lot of books in Audible, and you can, obviously reading or listening, great starts. So look, thank you for listening. I need to go. I've got to go on to other things, but it's been a real pleasure to start this. So this is the 5th episode of Friday Focus. In 2 weeks' time, we've got Sukhwinder Basi coming to join us, who is going to talk about people. So I'll leave that on the screen. So Sukhwinder Basi, Positive Change People, 6th of September at 7:45. Thank you for listening. Please like and share. Please share the resource, and obviously watch and just pick up stuff. I will the list of the books and things that I've recommended, I will make sure are available. But thanks for being here. We'll see you again at the next session. Take care.